All right. So for those that just came in, representatives are still voting on the floor, so they may join us, they may not join us. But luckily, we have Niklas here from the IFF to kind of take over for them. So, all right. Hello, everyone. I'm Jake Wyman at the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Welcome to this week's edition of Capital Clarity. Today's topic is on sound money. Though all too often overlooked, our sound money policy is paramount whether Idahoans thrive or not. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is we're still reeling from the last administration's failures. Record high inflation, conservatives being debanked for their beliefs, out of control government spending. The list goes on. While that's changing on the federal level, there's a lot we can do to improve on the state level as well. That's why there's nothing more crucial our legislature can do this session than pass sound money policies. This would include Bitcoin rights, tax-free use of crypto, gold, silver, and prohibiting the practice of debanking and preventing central bank digital currencies from being implemented. Our first speaker is a resident expert on all these matters. He has written extensively on this issue for the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and his work has been published in Bitcoin Magazine. Please welcome IFF's Policy Director and host of Fiscal Fridays, Niklas Kleinworth.
Good afternoon, everyone. So let me ask you a question. Which is more valuable, this dollar bill or this silver dollar? I know which one I'll pick, and I'm pretty sure I know which one all of you will pick as well. But in the eyes of the government, these two things are the same, which should tell you everything you need to know. Mind you that though these two things are equivalent in face value, this isn't due to some change in our perception of the value of these things. The silver is actually worth more than this dollar bill, this piece of paper from the Federal Reserve Bank. And it's not just that the value is different between these two things, but it's the strings attached to these two things too. The fiat dollar is increasingly weaponized against Americans for the government's own vindictive purposes. Instances of debanking and central bank digital currencies are increasingly concerning realities of the American financial system. But Trump is capitalizing on these developments from the last 4 years, reversing a lot of the damaging policies that the Biden administration has enacted related to America's fiscal policy. And in his very first week of his second term as president of the United States, he's done exciting things like banning central bank digital currencies, implementing a digital assets advisory board to help develop the next generation of money and assets for Americans. And he's also taken steps to audit things like the Federal Reserve, Fort Knox. I heard just this morning that they're going to even live stream the audit of Fort Knox to make sure that the gold is still there. What a time to be alive, though. So I've been writing about this issue of sound money for 3 years now. I started at the Idaho Freedom Foundation. My very first day I walked in and Wayne Hoffman came in and greeted me and he said, "What do you know about Bitcoin?" Nothing, sir. I don't know anything about Bitcoin. And at the time, things like CBDCs, debanking, and a lot of these other issues weren't actually even in the national dialogue. So it really is illustrative of how the times have changed. And for Idahoans, including many of you in this room right now, it's very important that you pay attention to these sound money policy developments. Even if you're not into things like Bitcoin or gold is more your cup of tea, or all you really care about is the fact that the federal government's ramping up our national debt. All these issues are very important things to pay attention to, and advancements in any one of these categories is an advancement toward the preservation of liberty and financial security of the United States. And so we should all be fans of what President Trump is doing and what many states are doing as well. So today I want to go over just the threats that we face in the United States related to our financial system, the policy developments that we're seeing both at the state level and now at the federal level as well, and the opportunities that Idaho could seize in the realm of sound money policy. And so by the end of this talk, I hope that you'll be as excited about these opportunities as I am on a day-to-day basis as I write about these topics and share them with you. And so to truly visualize what this new frontier of money has to offer, we must first understand the threats that are on the horizon. So because of the federal government's poor stewardship of our financial system, our dollar buys just 84% of what it did just 5 years ago. You can't get the same thing for this dollar as you did back in 2020. I guess that would be 2019 now. And compared to 100 years ago, this dollar is only as valuable as really an IOU. It's incomparable. And so, as if this wasn't bad enough, the government is seeking to weaponize the system against American citizens. So how many of you in this room have heard of central bank digital currencies? So most of you have heard of central bank digital currencies. And for the edification of the people watching online, the central bank digital currency is the federal government's digital dollar. Now, this is different than crypto or anything like that. It's managed by a central authority, being this Federal Reserve Bank, but it uses technology to where it's able to be programmed. It can automatically deduct taxes. Your stimulus check can then be set to expire on a certain day, so no more saving your stimulus check. You'll be forced to spend it. The government wants to speed up the economy. They can apply an expiration date to your savings after you've already put it into your account. They can automatically deduct taxes, automatically pay out welfare, and even track all of your purchases and record all of those transactions with a central bank digital currency. This is a real threat to Americans and even state sovereignty. States need to be concerned about this as well, because if states are spending the money, right now states are tied by the federal government. They're spending federal money only. The state of Idaho has to do certain things to maintain compliance with federal regulations. But if you switch to the central bank digital currency, now the federal government can dictate how all the money in the state is spent. And so now we've taken our system, not only broken down the freedoms for the individuals, but we've broken down the freedoms for our states. And so what's more terrifying about this is you don't have to really imagine what a future of central bank digital currency with a central bank digital currency would look like. Other countries have already implemented this. In fact, 135 separate government jurisdictions across the world have already implemented central bank digital currencies. And that data is from the Human Rights Foundation. They have this really great central bank digital currency tracker online. In places like China, they actually tie their central bank digital currencies to a social credit score. And so if you do things that the government doesn't like, or let's say your carbon footprint gets a little too big, then they can throttle your wealth and prevent you from being able to spend your money as freely as you ought to. And so Americans, and in America, we don't even have to wait for a central bank digital currency to be implemented before we can experience this censorship and this government control over our wealth and the way we manage our money. This already happens through something called debanking, which is defined by the Foundation for Government Accountability as the political or religious discrimination by financial institutions. Now, one would immediately retort by saying that this is a private bank. They're allowed to decide who they want to do business with. And that's what it could seem like from the outside. But once you look under the hood, you find that the government is actually behind all of this. It's through a program through the Securities and Exchange Commission called Operation Choke Point. We're now on Operation Choke Point 2.0. There was one under Barack Obama, and now there was another one under President Biden. And the idea behind this is that they are pressuring banks to debank people who have particular religious affiliations, political affiliations. If you're in a non-green industry like oil, if you're a firearms manufacturer, you get debanked because the federal government is telling these financial institutions to not bank you. And this is critically, this is crippling, I meant to say, for people in a society like the one that we live in today, where you can't make any financial transactions online without some type of a bank account. And in a world where we demand instant settlement, how many of you had to pay your rent online this month? You couldn't just drop a check into the Dropbox like you would normally do only probably 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And so it can destroy your livelihood. And that was actually the intent behind this. And so people are looking to escape this failing system. So we're turning to things like gold, we're turning to things like silver, and we're turning to things like Bitcoin and digital assets instead. And while silver and gold are good at holding value, they can also be impractical for certain settings. So presently, precious metals simply cannot support a world of online commerce or instant transactions. And given the increasing value of precious metals, this also causes them to lose their practicality because they're not divisible. So by now, and for now, with the current laws on the books, you are also taxed on the gains from transacting using gold and silver. We hope to change that this legislative session. And so this is where the free market comes in too. So one of the solutions for the issues with making gold and silver divisible is that a lot of companies are coming out with gold-backed notes, which allows you to exchange smaller denominations of gold or precious metal. And additionally, we have the advent of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies to provide this new frontier of transactions that can hold value and be a sound store of wealth. Keep in mind that Bitcoin in particular is decentralized, private, and censorship resistant. And its design is to be a place for transactions to exist without relying on a neutral third party to broker these transactions. Bitcoiners call this the trustless system. You don't need a bank to manage the transactions between the parties. You just exchange Bitcoin, much like cash. And so the prospect of having a private, durable, freedom-focused money is why I'm excited that states and President Trump alike have made this policy a priority this year. States have long made gains in the sound money space. Over the last 4 years, 15 state attorneys general, including our very own Raul Labrador, worked to demand answers on debanking from financial institutions like Wells Fargo. 10 states imposed bans on central bank digital currencies. 5 of them passed legislation to protect fundamental Bitcoin rights. 4 states made gold and silver legal tender. And 1 state, Utah, allows physical custody of precious metals in the state treasury. With his short time back in the White House, President Trump also decided to make up for lost time. He signed an executive order that halted Biden's development of a central bank digital currency and banned its creation at the federal level to the extent that he can control it. Now, we still want Congress to pass legislation to prevent the creation of central bank digital currency, given the chance for a future administration to overturn those executive orders. Mind you, they're only temporary. He also created a working group to advise him on digital asset policy and took steps to advance the strategic Bitcoin reserve at the federal level. There is also pending legislation in the U.S. Senate on that particular issue. This both builds on the work in the states and inspires them. As of now, 32 states are taking Donald Trump's lead by introducing legislation to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. 4 states have passed these bills out of committee, and now they're receiving full consideration before their respective houses and senates. Americans should be thrilled to see so much of this attention on this issue. I struggle to remember a time where lawmakers worked in such a concerted effort to rectify the issues with a financial system that leaves so many Americans behind. It's an amazing time that we live in right now. But despite all this great policy moving across the nation, Idaho still has a lot of work to do. With the exception of the work from the Labrador office on debanking, Idaho has little sound money policy advancements to speak of. Governor Little vetoed legislation for the state to hold physical gold and silver in our state reserves just last year. Gold and silver is still not recognized as legal tender, leaving residents to pay the gains on taxes for transactions in that medium. But as of this morning, hopefully change is on the way. Representative Miller will speak more to that. Idaho still does not have protections for fundamental Bitcoin rights as enshrined in statute, leaving its adoption vulnerable to overregulation, and we still lack the protections necessary to fight against the central bank digital currency, allowing the federal government to subvert the sovereignty of our state and our freedoms as residents. With the time remaining in this legislative session, we hope to bring Idaho up to speed with the call of the times. Our neighbors to the east in Montana, Wyoming, and Utah enjoy many of these protections. And it is time Idahoans no longer get left out. The lawmakers who will speak after me will detail their own vision for what this could look like. I implore you to offer them your support and encouragement as they try to advance these policies through the Idaho legislature. So, like the expansiveness of new wave of sound money policy, I just covered a lot of ground in this presentation. So let me close with this. In the status quo, your freedoms are at risk. The last 4 years illustrated how the financial system will be used to silence your speech and surveil your lives. But with the changes in Washington, D.C., and significant moves at the state level, policymakers are flipping the script. Idaho has opportunities to make real change on sound money policy. It's time that the Gem State joined this fight. Thank you. I took your picture too. There you go. I need you to speak on the fly.
All right. Luckily, both representatives made it, so they're off the House floor. So once again, please give it up for Niklas. Our next speaker is Representative Steve Miller. Representing the 14th District, Representative Miller has introduced great sound money legislation this session, which would declare gold and silver legal tender in the state of Idaho. Please welcome Representative Steve Miller.
Perfect. How's that? We got anything? Are we live? Good news, bad news. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I appreciate it. This morning we took House 177. I've been doing this for several years, took it in last year, wanted a domestic part of it since we have a lot of silver production here. That was logical. So it was late in the session, so I just came back this year with a bill and we got it through, got it printed, and I'm very pleased with that. The reference to tax to capital gains is going to be taken care of in the tax cut bill that's coming through. That's a primary part of that. So I didn't stick it in this bill because I wanted this to be as simple and as clean a bill as could be made. And so it's a little two-pager and it just doesn't get much easier than this. All this does is defines legal tender in Idaho. And I floated this by the AG because you'll get into conversations of what is legal tender, and if you use something, if you don't use it to pay taxes or you don't use it in certain ways, is it actual legal tender? So floated it by the AG. This was the recommendation they came back with as my bill. All it says is willing seller, willing buyer. You can't be forced to accept it. It defines legal tender, and all it is under this is stamped with weight and purity. It can be a coin, it can be a small bar, anything like that. And we included domestic use in it, so anything in the U.S. can come under this. It is our right to use the specie by choice, and that choice, that right cannot be taken from us. That's in the bill. We cannot be forced to use it. You can enter into a contract and be forced by the contract, but there's no other way to be forced that way. Any person, any entity, business entity, that kind of thing, and the state and all of the agencies under the state would be enabled. So this is what I view as the first step. Is at some point in time, when the economy and prices and whatnot drive this, then it will become popular to take the next step. There's been 6 other states that have done similar kinds of bills. Utah is the most extensive. They go ahead and use a London spot to set a price of silver every day. And so if you go into trade or whatever, a business, then that's how that price of silver is set every day. And it's an extensive bill. If you're interested in this kind of thing, take a look at theirs, take a look at Texas. I actually like Utah's the best. There's an awful lot of, statute that happens in Utah that's really good statute. And frankly, whenever I'm looking at something, if it's not done in Idaho or something to look at, then I go look at Utah, Oklahoma, Texas, just depending on what it is that you're interested in. So the Constitution, our forefathers set this up. Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. And then there's some other stuff on there. And of course, we've got the 10th Amendment, which defines the powers of the states, right? Not get delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. Court case, Supreme Court, Lane County versus Oregon, 1886, basically says the state possesses broad powers to specify acceptable tender for the payment of taxes. So we have a legal background, not only just the constitutional background, but a support by a court case that helps us down this road. When we talk about money supply, when we talk about precious metals, it's always been an essence of the history of trade, and one of the oldest ones you can find. Some really interesting books. If you've ever read, I'm blank, Friedman's got 2 or 3 books that are not only on economy, but history that are really good. And another is Ray Dalio, if you're familiar with him. Investor, got started in the game, almost went broke, decided that if he was going to invest, he needed to know what the market was going to do, not just study what the market had done. And in that, he did a whole lot of historical work, understanding of economy, understanding monetary systems. And he's got a couple, 3 really good books. And he also has one book that goes into how his management of his company is. And if you have any interest in those kinds of things, I just urge you to take them and read them. I'm an audiobooks guy, so I get it and I listen to it on the road. It's just great. So the first monetary system in the U.S. is seashells off the western seashore. And it turns out that they used them up and down the coast, but it also turns out they found them clear out in the Midwest. So it kind of indicated the amount of travel, the interchange, if you will. The people carry things that are dear to them, right? And so they wound up with these seashells clear halfway across the U.S. Precious metals, of course, goes way back. The Romans, the Greeks before them, but that, of course, are the more famous historical governments. And in every one of those governments, and this goes across history. They would start out with the real thing, silver and gold. And then pretty soon there would be an alloy. And then pretty soon it wouldn't even be a precious metal. And you look at look at what happened to the U.S. And we had silver coins, right? And then we had alloy coins. And some things never change. George Santayana, late 1950s, kind of a philosopher, one that he's mostly ascribed with saying, he who doesn't know his history is doomed to repeat it. And that is a truism, I think, that echoes across the centuries. The same things happen over and over. Why is that? Why does the same thing happen? Why does each government, or many governments, repeat the same things? It's human nature, right? It's not that governments are special. People are pretty much the same, and they're pretty much the same wherever you are in the world. Culturally, they advance and change, and different things happen at different times. But the essence of the human nature of the critter is pretty much the same. Another, I think, really good historical lesson is that every empire fails. Find an empire that hasn't failed. We're living in the most successful country, the greatest country the world's ever known, an empire, if you will, and we will fail. They fail because they are conquered, or they fail because of economic collapse. Now, it's not likely we're going to be conquered. What's the alternative? It's happened to every nation. No one escapes this. Probably one of the nations that came closest to escaping it would have been Great Britain. Coming out of World War II, they still held a basis and do as well as any, but they're no longer world currency by a long shot. And we've had the tax on our world currency, what China and India, what the BRIC nations are trying to do. And we can be so thankful that we have a president now that's going to reestablish so many things in not only our economy, but in the world economy and the strength of the dollar around the world. There's a million ways to go with this, but we'll just have to pick one. In 1964, I believe it was, the silver certificate, which had been in place since 1878 to 1964, and Nixon decided that we didn't want to back the dollar with gold. There wasn't enough dollars. With all of the trade, there wasn't enough coin, if you will, value to trade billions and billions and now trillions of dollars. And that's a rationale, and that's also a discussion going back into Bitcoin and different things like that. But in 1964, I believe it was 64 or 68, gold was $35 an ounce. I looked this morning and it's somewhere around $29.49. That's 84 times the value. If you had a 1964 dollar, well, my father-in-law bought a car in 68. Chevy Malibu gave $40,000 for it. $4,000 for it. And that car now is probably about $35,000, depending on model and whatnot. Give you some idea of the comparative value and why having precious metals as a currency, as a legal tender that we can hold and hold value across. You look at the way the dollar's grown and the gold has gone, gold sustains its value. You always hear the term fiat currency. So when you don't have a precious metal or some kind of a metal backing to a currency, fiat is basically, I don't even know language. Latin maybe? But basically it says you just declare something. So at that point in time when Nixon removed that gold value, he said that this is the dollar, and the phrase is it's the full faith and credit of the United States behind that dollar. And that makes that dollar good around the world. And And you know, when the Soviet Union was melting down, you know, they didn't have a currency that's worth anything. But if you had a U.S. $100 bill, you had money. You could take it anywhere. And that's worked for us for a long time. But as we go, as the economy cycle, as things change, then we're going to see this dollar erode more and more. And again, that's why we want to land back with the precious metal. One of the things that Nixon did that was really good is he cut a deal with the Saudis that they would only trade in U.S. dollars. And that stayed alive until about last year. That in many ways helped solidify the U.S. dollar as a world currency for all this time. And I think it was just last year that the Saudis finally backed out of a deal and started trading in other currencies. That's an erosion. So it's going to be really interesting to see what President Trump does with some of these other things. If he draws them back in, what he's doing in the Mideast is going to affect us for decades if he gets that completed, because we've seen that erosion. And we all have Bibles that we read, and we all know what the end game is. We're not part of the end game. The U.S. doesn't show up there. So we need to think our way through this when we're looking at all these different things, when we're planning out our futures. Where am I at on time? One of the things you talk about is gold reserves. One of the things you talk about is why has gold changed so much? And when we talked about the gold being about 85 times what it was in the 60s, silver is about 15 times what it was. Interesting comparison, and I don't think I got time to play with that, but I'm going to go talk about gold reserves. The U.S. has got about 8,100 tons of gold. Germany has 3,350, Italy 2,450, France 24, China 22. China's been buying a lot of gold in the last few years. They had, I think, like 1,200 tons just a few years ago. They've been accumulating it. Part of the reason we've seen gold do what it's done in the last couple of years is there's a number of nations, India is another, that have been accumulating larger amounts than other nations. But the U.S. has as much gold as the next four nations. And then you get into others like Japan at 850, India 840, Netherlands at 6, Turkey at 5. One of the things that struck me about this is why Germany, Italy, and France, how come they got so much more than everyone else? And my thought on that is World War I and World War II. Those countries, those people lived through really, really severe times where their currencies literally weren't worth the paper they were printed on. And so I suspect that part of that is a cultural memory of those times, even though they're 2 and 3 generations away from that. Those generations closest to World War I and the Great Depression and World War II, that's where our greatest generation came from, right? That's the people that lived through that. And the next generation or two remember those lessons because they grew up with either their parents or their grandparents that instilled those things in them. And now we're a couple, 3 generations beyond that. And that's why we've seen so many changes in our culture, in our government, in our expectations of what government should be, whether it's the nanny government or whether it's a minimal government that just provides you the basics. And so when we deal with those things, we got to understand the population that we're dealing with, what we can do that way. I'm afraid I've used up all your time. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and just encourage everybody to give a green light to 177. Thank you.
Please, once again, give it up for Representative Miller. Our final speaker is Representative Elaine Price, also known as North Idaho's voice in Boise. Representative Price's top goals this session are promoting economic development, safeguarding our constitutional rights, and dedicating herself to fighting for the issues that matter most to Idahoans. Please welcome Representative Elaine Price.
Goodness. I think they took all my talking points. But I guess I can be the practical application to everything that they've been saying. When we talk about debanking, you're looking at somebody who is debanked. My husband and I own a coin shop. We also are an FFL. And when we started the business, we didn't have that FFL. And we contracted with a major credit card company to use their processing services. During COVID, we started our FFL business. And in the morning, we went and ran a credit card, no issues. About 11 o'clock, we ran a credit card and it wouldn't go through. We're like, what in the world is going on? Tried it several times. We lost that sale because we couldn't get that through. On the machine, I finally had time. We were busy at the time, didn't have time to look in it. And on the machine, it gave us this message. You need to look at this email. So we go to this email, and this email says, we've shut off your service. You violated one of our policies. I can't remember the rest of it, but they directed us to this other part of their services that they could accommodate us for. Well, digging through their policy, we figured it out that it's because we're an FFL. Didn't call us, didn't tell us, didn't warn us that it was going to happen. They just shut us down. So we scrambled, went through our bank, and got ourselves up and running again. But we were a couple of days where we had to turn away sales because I shouldn't say that. We don't take a lot of credit cards. We don't encourage credit cards because we're a money business. So we didn't lose a lot of sales. We lost a few sales, but just the fact that they didn't warn us, they didn't tell us that they were going to do this, they just shut us down without any warning. So if you don't think debanking can happen, I'm your story that debanking can happen. Gold and silver, using it as a currency. Everybody thinks that they have to buy an ounce of gold or that they have to buy an ounce of silver. You don't have to buy an ounce of gold. There are fractionals out there. They do cost you a little bit more, but there's grams, there's 1/10 ounce, there's half ounce, there's quarter ounces. And what I always tell everybody is you're not really going to use your gold, you're going to use your silver. So having gold is a good thing to have, but you shouldn't think that that's what you're going to, it's like people talk about, what am I going to do? How am I going to use an ounce of gold? If the dollar were to collapse, how am I going to use an ounce of gold? You're not going to use your ounce of gold, you're going to use your silver in everyday bartering. Many may not know this, but there are places up in North Idaho that are bartering with gold and silver. There's businesses that are actually bartering with gold and silver. When it comes to doing that, right now, because there is not a lot of knowledge on this, you're going to have to work with somebody who understands the intrinsic value of gold and silver and how to figure out how to use that. Now, hopefully, if we were to get Representative Miller's bill passed, I think it's going to open the conversation a little bit more. A lot of these bills, that's what we do, is we put these bills out there to start the conversations, to open the conversations. When we talked about allowing our treasurer to invest in gold and silver, she's actually for the ability to do that. But unfortunately, politics got in the way and the bill was vetoed, and we didn't have the numbers to override that veto. So hopefully we'll see that bill in the future. But the concept of using gold and silver is something that we need to have conversations about, how that's going to look. My husband and I, we hear a lot of stories. I can probably go the conspiracy theory route for you, or I can go to actually practical application. We've had a lot of conversations with people about what they see is going to happen. Our dollar is shrinking, and it's shrinking quickly. Representative Miller talked about why China has so much gold, why India has so much gold. They're trying to get the US dollar off the world market. They're trying to open a bank called BRICS, which would be the world currency versus the dollar. We've lost the backing of the petrodollar. If that happens, our country's going to be in a world of hurt. And so we need to think about the alternatives. We need to think about gold and silver, and having our state invested in gold and silver would help hedge against that. When cryptocurrency came out, I was not a fan of cryptocurrency because, like I said, I'm a physical person. I like to hold it. And cryptocurrencies are on the internet. I've changed my mind on that. And the biggest reason why I've changed my mind on that is because the government can't control it. And they tried to shut it down because they could not control it. And so why not encourage an alternative that the government is not involved in that actually has been fairly successful? You look at Bitcoin, an interesting story. My son, with friends, they wanted to buy pizza, and his friend says, well, I can give you part of this Bitcoin, and we're talking 2014 probably. And my son's like, why not? Well, it's in a hard drive somewhere, probably in my basement of a dismantled computer. So he could be sitting on a gold mine if he could track that down. But once again, at the time, it was like, I don't know, $3, $4, something like that. And look at it now, because people have backed it and have faith in it. Talked about fiat currency. Fiat currency is because we have given the government trust that that money is going to be worth something. How does everybody feel about it now? They don't have that trust in that fiat currency as much as they used to. So gold and silver is an option, and I'm going to encourage cryptocurrencies. I ran a bill last session. We couldn't get it off the floor. We kind of packed a lot into that bill, and we got the utilities mad at us, so they fought it and they shut it down. We were looking at bringing it back this year. I'm not 100% sure that's going to happen, but if it doesn't happen this year, we'll have it ready to go so we can start it at the beginning of next session. But just giving it a little more credibility in Idaho, once again, opening the conversations, and I don't know where else to go with this, but I think we're going to leave it open to questions.
And anyone who wants to ask a question, come up here. You might have to come up a little bit more, sorry.
So you mentioned that utilities, is this working? Okay. Utilities are blocking the last bill that you proposed. Is that like the electric company because of the charges that come from electricity being used for like Bitcoin?
The answer to that question is yes. We were trying to encourage Bitcoin mining, and they were concerned that we were going to use too much energy. Sorry, they were concerned that we were going to use too much electricity. So yeah, that's why.
Yeah, because there are other currencies now that use proof of work.
Correct.
Yeah, which is Bitcoin, but then there's also proof of stake, which doesn't use that much energy.
Well, and the thing is too is that there's alternatives to. Oh no, it was water. It was a combination of both. Yeah, it was a combination of both, electricity and water. They were concerned that they were going to use too much water to cool the machines. But yes, It's because I think part of it is they don't understand the whole thing. Yeah.
If I may speak to that question just a little bit more, last year we were running into and what's really interesting is the power companies, they sent all the lobbyists against that piece of legislation. We had a working group with lawmakers to kind of go through the bill and help them understand all the parts. And of course, it's a public meeting; anybody can show up. And if we had lawmakers and 5 lobbyists from all the power companies there to be there for that meeting, it was an interesting experience to say the least. But what we were trying to do is actually in Idaho, Idaho Power in particular charges a discriminatory rate for people who mine Bitcoin specifically. So now keep in mind, you think about data centers, AI actually uses more electricity than your typical industrial Bitcoin mine. But they wouldn't be subjected to the same rate because they're a data center. But a Bitcoin mine is also a data center, and they get charged 84% more for their electricity. So this bill was supposed to put a stop to that, but the power companies wanted to keep that in place for obvious reasons.
Why would they want to make more money?
Right. Yes.
It seems to me that the whole concept of capital gain on gold and silver is very dubious. It sort of implies that you'd have to keep track of which coin you bought when, which is ridiculous. And it's onerous. And I would say that the gold and silver are worth an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver, period, and that they are the standard of value. And the piece of paper that you get for it is what degrades, and you have to keep your focus on that. And a historical thing is, if I can get away with this, I went to the Wright Brothers Museum on the North Carolina coast, and I was quite depressed to find that all the effort they did leading up to their first flight was $1,100. Years of going back and forth to Ohio. They put up buildings, they hired an assistant. That's depressing.
How you doing? Dwight McCarty from Eagle, Idaho. Thank you all for being here. I have a couple different things. Nicholas, thank you very much for talking about Central Bank Digital Currencies. I think we all need to know how destructive that would be to the sovereignty of America and to Idaho. So let's all know that we need to stop that. To Representative Miller, thank you very much for mentioning Milton Friedman and Ray Dalio, both excellent economists and have done very well. And to the voice of North Idaho and Boise, where would you suggest, well, I have 2 questions. Where would you suggest we actually buy silver other than like a dime that's old or something like that? Can we buy bullion, or can we put some in our stash? And then also, do Idaho companies currently have to accept cash? And if that's true currently, like, because some people say we're a cashless business, we don't want to accept cash, and we want to say, well, take it, need it, because this is valuable, and don't tell me I just have to pay with credit or something else. Thank you.
So to buy gold and silver, if you're in North Idaho, I know a place you can go, but I encourage buying it. Find a local store, find a local business that sells gold and silver, and you can buy. It's called 90% or junk silver, which is the 1964 earlier dimes, quarters, and half dollars. And I would encourage to buy those because that's your fractional silver. It's less of an over the spot price than if you buy fractional silver, like a 10th silver. So I would encourage not to buy it online. And the reason why I encourage that is because there's a digital transaction. And if somebody were to hack into a business, then they'll now know that you bought and where you live and all that good stuff. So on the, do they have to buy cash? Or do they have to accept cash? I can't wrap my brain around this. My husband and I have had this conversation. He feels that once you create a debt with a company, that how they are just going to have to cancel that debt if they don't accept cash. But that's just our opinion. We've passed legislation that said, was it the state of Idaho? Yeah, state of Idaho cannot refuse taking cash. We're hesitant about imposing state government on private businesses, but in my mind, I don't understand how they don't accept cash. It doesn't compute with me.
Yeah, so I know from business owners, they say cash is difficult to manage, right? You got like $754 that you need to deposit every single day. So they say it's way more efficient and effective for the business owner to do it. So I know that's at least the mentality of the business owners. But at some point, you need to say, well, this is legal tender in the state of Idaho and the state, nation of America, and you need to figure out how to figure that out. And I think they would say, well, I'm just not going to sell you my whatever.
And that's pretty much, I think, what it comes down to is that you've got to stand up and say this is legal tender, or you got to be ready
I
to
want my double cheeseburger.
Drop and walk away. So yeah. And just something that I do, that I pay with cash. I pay with cash everywhere I go as long as I can. And so I think that if more people were to do that, then I think it would get them to realize that we're not accepting your pay with a digital currency, in my opinion, than just pay with cash. So I think that if we, as a state, were to stand up and say, no, we're paying with cash, you figure it out, I think it would help in this situation.
Just one quick comment on that with businesses accepting cash and dealing with those private transactions. The reason why we put the Central Bank Digital Currency, IFF has recommended that the Central Bank Digital Currency ban needs to go with the Bitcoin rights bill. And the reason is that if you were to have a central bank digital currency, the federal government can't really control what the state wants to accept and deal with. And so you can put it in statute that the state will not participate in a central bank digital currency. But then what do you do with all the private businesses? The federal government is going to have all these incentives for these people to want to use it and transact. It's supposed to be easier and things like that. And so to keep up with the times, we recommended that if you can open up the market to alternative currencies, gold, silver, Bitcoin, then you've given businesses an escape route from the dollar and from the digital dollar that's coming down the pike. And so those two policies go hand in hand. You could separate them, but they complement each other, dealing with the government and the private sector.
No, I'm done.
Hi, I'm really new to this subject and this far from totally ignorant. Why are you aware of the proponents of digital banking, what their defense is, why they say this should happen, how they get people to go along with it?
It really just boils down to convenience. It's a few different things. So if you read the latest report from, I don't believe it was the Federal Reserve. It was one of the federal agencies. The Federal Reserve, people don't know the Federal Reserve Bank is actually a private entity. It's not a government entity. But one of the actual bureaucracies came out with a report. For some reason, I'm blanking on the name. But they listed all the reasons why. And among the reasons was other countries are doing it. So to compete with China, we have to have our own central bank digital currency. So we're going to fight communism with communism. And that's how it's going to work. And then the convenience as well. So they say that this will help reduce transaction fees. This will help make transactions faster and things like that, make it more portable. But then the third thing that they slipped in there was that it'll help bank people who are debanked or unbanked is the word that they used. And what that means is there's actually a sizable chunk of the population that either doesn't have enough money in their to be able to start a bank account, or they prefer to not store their assets in a bank. And so if you switch to a completely digital dollar, all those people will have to transact on the digital dollar and through some sort of institution. And so it's really about this control. You can control that whole section of the population that you can't just debank to control them. And so
And I get that's what would be the underlying motivation for them to do it. But how do they get John Q. Public to say, "Oh, this is a good idea"?
it's easy. It just makes it more. They start off with those lines. They just don't go as deep as I said. So they'll say you have more access, transactions be faster and cheaper.
Convenience, easy. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Oh, is this on?
Can
Okay.
I just say one thing real quick? Ask somebody under 30 if they have cash in their wallet. That's how they do it.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm really grateful to be able to attend this and have you all talking about this. One of the things that I haven't heard a lot about that I'm really interested in, understanding better is there's a lot of journalism that I've listened to recently, independent journalism, talking about the central bank currency is a threat, obviously. But the other part that isn't really getting a lot of coverage in the media is that there are these oligarchies and companies and entities that have actually backed, unfortunately, in many cases, they don't just back, the Democrats, they also back the Republicans. And what do we do about privatization of currencies that could also be as big of a threat as a central bank digital currency would be? Do you guys have any insight to that, or is that something that you think is relevant and important? Because I'm very concerned about it. So
I think it's worth the concern. And really, though, it boils down to who's controlling the money. I think that the mistake a lot of people make is they assume that the government is this neutral third party that's has no interest in how the money is managed, which is not true. In fact, the government has a lot of interest in how the money is managed. I would say that when you're picking an alternative to the dollar, you need to look at how that currency is backed. So if you're going with gold and silver, I would say that you're probably not too concerned about third parties running that currency.
right.
But this is why something like Bitcoin is really good, actually, because it's decentralized. No one person owns Bitcoin. Bitcoin isn't a corporation or one company. It's something that's shared by all the users. And everybody who's transacting with Bitcoin, participating in that system, has a stake in that system. And so in a system like that, you also don't have to worry as much about the privatization of it. But I would be worried about a lot of these other cryptocurrencies. So you have to be very critical of the cryptocurrencies you're looking at. Some of these cryptocurrencies are meme coins, or they're not Bitcoin. They're not backed by the proof of work. And the proof of work is really important because the value of the Bitcoin is given to it by the amount it costs something real. It costs the energy to run that that calculation to mine the Bitcoin, to actually get it. It takes energy to do it. Just like you have to go mine gold, you have to. How do I wrap all this up? I guess all I'm saying is be skeptical of how the currencies are backed. Gold and silver is great. Bitcoin, the way it's managed right now, by its nature, is a really good alternative. Be skeptical of the dollar and the people who are running the dollar, and be skeptical of some of these other cryptocurrencies.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Question? Okay. You want to come over here? Cash Patel was just confirmed. Yes.
So, question regarding Trump's executive order that he just signed the 25th. How does the banning of the central bank digital currency, how does that relate to this discussion? Just want to connect the dots, because doesn't that ban the crypto from the government going into cryptocurrency and allowing the CBDC to be set up?
The central bank digital currency is different than cryptocurrencies. It's basically it would be exactly what you were talking about, where the government is basically running all digital currency, and they knowing where you're spending your money, having the ability to shut it on and off. His executive order, like Niklas said, it shuts it down for now, but as an executive order, that can be overturned by the next administration. It needs to be in code, and that's why we're trying to get it in state code, so that if another administration were to start it up again, that we already have it in code that we're against it.
So I guess what's key about that executive order is that all he's doing is he's shutting down the existing operations that the federal bureaucracy was pursuing to try and establish a central bank digital currency. So Biden already created a task force and a study group to investigate what that would look like and create kind of the model for a central bank digital currency. Trump's executive order ended that, and then proclaimed that no executive agency may participate in the development of a central bank digital currency. But it doesn't ban a central bank digital currency yet. That needs to come from Congress, and it needs to come from the states. And you had one more question.
Well, in terminology, cryptocurrency is distributed ledger. So, and everybody who is doing mining is checking on everybody else. And that's not legitimate, unlike centralized currency, the government. So everybody wants to keep it honest in their mining because they have a stake.
Okay.
We are 6 minutes over.
All right. Thank you for coming to today's Capital Clarity. Please join us next Thursday to hear from IFF Sam Lair, Dr. Scott Yenner from the Claremont Institute, and Senator Ben Taves on repealing DEI in higher education. Thank you.